people in the borough of Middletown. There has been an accident at 3 Mile Island. All pregnant women and preschool children should evacuate out of a 5-mile radius.
3 Mile Island, scene of the world's worst nuclear accident. 6 years ago, the core of this reactor overheated and began to melt. It took only minutes for the core to be damaged, but the reactor will take a decade to be cleaned up. Some of the interior is still so radioactive that only machines can survive there. A lot of money has been spent on producing robot vehicles which can move around under remote control. The ultimate aim is for them to be able to navigate on their own, identify objects, and do useful work, using artificial intelligence to decide what to do. This machine is being lowered into one of the worst areas, the lower containment vessel, where the floodwater is radioactive. The vehicle just setting off to explore was one of a number developed at nearby Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. A park keeper's delight, this one keeps off the grass and stays on the path using a video camera to scan the ground ahead. Computers analyze the scene, looking for parallel lines in the machine's plane of movement. The microcomputers on board control the steering, keeping it on the path without human intervention. Because the full analysis of what it sees requires a mainframe computer to do the calculations, it must relay its pictures back by radio. From its camera, it captures a series of digitized, high-contrast images and analyzes them, looking for features, in this case, parallel lines. It then looks for changes between one image and the next, and it is those changes which make it adjust its steering. Professor Red Whitaker is in charge of the project.
But there are lots of parallel lines in the world. How does it keep them separate?
Well, in this case, it's given some cues, specifically that it looks for lines which are parallel, evenly spaced, lines that are long. And using that criterion, it could, for instance, tell the difference between a road edge and a blade of grass.
Does it ever make mistakes?
Well, certainly. Our worst foul-up, which was that this machine was following this path that we're sitting on now and traveling in that direction. It looked into the scene, took a look at a tree, and interpreted it in the following way: a pair of parallel edges that are long, that are straight, that will cast into its scene as an excellent road model. And it decided that that looked better than the path, took the tree, climbed the tree, and that was the end of that particular one. But in fact, the foul-ups are as common as the successes.
But the responsibility of letting this powerful machine loose in the real world in its present simple-minded state is a heavy one, especially for academics used to the safety of the laboratory. How would you like to meet one of these on a dark night? The inside of 3 Mile Island is a hostile one for any machine. Highly radioactive water scoured out the containment building and has left a lethal scum. Radiation levels here would be enough to give a man a lethal dose. Prolonged exposure is enough to burn out a video camera and affect circuitry on equipment which isn't properly shielded. On this unique film, we are seeing what Red Whitaker's machine saw last year inside 3 Mile Island as it moved down the now deserted corridors. A different approach to automatic navigation is being tried out back in the less hazardous corridors of Carnegie Mellon University. Instead of using vision to find its way about, this robot uses sonar, in other words, high-frequency sound waves, which are reflected back from objects in its path. I gather that robot in the hallway has a name.
Yes, we call him Lurch.
And these are earlier versions of Lurch?
Yeah, this was the first version. This one's called Imp. And this is the one that came after that, and we call him Mobley.
Now, what does IMP stand for?
Well, IMP stands for, theoretically, Intelligent Mobile Platform.
And Mobley, what does that stand for?
Mobley stands for misspelling of mobile, I'm afraid.
Lurch scans the corridor using a ring of ultrasonic sensors, and you can see on the screen a representation of how it moves forward. The 3 parallel lines show its proposed path. As it sweeps round, it's plotting the position of walls and other objects and measuring its distance from them. If there is nothing in its way, it moves forward. Now, I use sonar as a technique. I'm much more used to seeing things than hearing them.
People are very good at seeing things. Computers, unfortunately, are not. The problem of vision is very computationally intensive. It's difficult for computers to do it. People are working on it, but it's tricky. Sonar is good because it immediately tells you things about your environment. It tells you where you can and cannot go. So the information is immediately useful. A robot using sonar doesn't have to bump into anything because it always knows how far things are away from it.
Okay, what does it not do so well?
Well, it has a couple problems. Obviously, it sees at this level. It won't see things down here, and it won't see things up in the air. So it's possible for the robot to bump into something that it hasn't seen. It also gets fooled by things like the metal door outside our lab actually behaves like a mirror, just as people would be fooled by a room full of mirrors. Sonar can be fooled when the beams reflect off
by an acoustic mirror.
Exactly.
Well, it's all well and good to use sonar to build up a picture of the walls of a room so that the robot doesn't run into them. But what happens when the robot's in the room and has to do useful work? Sonar's not good enough. How could sonar pick up this cup in the midst of all these objects and interpret what it was? You've got to use some kind of computer vision instead, and that's a much, much more difficult task. This device is being used to test an alternative approach to computer vision. It starts here, where an infrared laser diode creates a point of light, which is spread into a line by this half-cylindrical mirror. The line scans across the object and is picked up by this lens. The computer knows what angle the lens is at, what angle the light's at, and is continually triangulating as it scans along the object. It does this several times, different angles, and builds up a three-dimensional picture from its two-dimensional data. This is what the computer sees. Jerry Agan has been working on this problem for 15 years. Jerry, how does the computer sort anything meaningful out of that jumble of white lines?
Well, the idea is to build up a model in terms of features. For example, if it were looking for a flat surface, it would take a scan across in this direction, say like so, and then it would orient itself, say like this, and take another scan in a perpendicular direction. So if from two consecutive scans it finds that the surface is flat, it knows that there's a flat plane at that point.
And what does it do with that information?
Okay, that information isn't sufficient to tell, say, the difference between this and this, because they both have flat planes. So it has to go out and find more features. For example, edges, cylindrical surfaces. In the case of this object, it would scan this cylindrical surface and find that it's fairly long. In the case of this object, it would find it's fairly small. It would then have to go in and say, if it might be this, and if it might be this, where should I look in order to be able to tell the difference? So it has to it'll actually go out and
search
looking for that loop. Yes,
I understand.
And that will distinguish.
Of course, there's yet a further level of difficulty to the problem. Once you've gotten into the room and identified what's there, you have to deal with it in some way. Now, that's a big problem, right, Hans?
It involves integrating sensors, motion coordination, servoing to the actual manipulation. We're working on a time scale roughly 2 or 3 years on a problem that should enable one of our robots in that time to do the following. Identify a door visually.
Step one.
Servo towards the door. This is a navigation problem. With an arm extended.
Which is an engineering problem.
Yes, well, we are at the moment going to be working with a rather specialized arm, but the idea is that eventually we go to other things as well. Robot approaches door, servos hand onto doorknob.
Just like that.
Tightens hand, opens door, and then pulls back. Using, well, we have a robot with omnidirectional mobility, which makes this possible. Releases doorknob.
And walks out the door.
Well, that's the first time on Micro Live that anyone has walked out on an interview. Let's hope it's the last. Next week we come live from Garth Hill School in Bracknell for a 3/4-hour programme, a special programme on computers in schools. And watch out because we start slightly earlier than usual at 7:15. Until then, night.
That programme can be seen again next Monday at 5:30 here on 2.